Welcome to Colonial Williamsburg. In this tour, we will visit Colonial Williamsburg as it looks today based on restorations and recreations. Colonial Williamsburg opened to the public as a restored colonial village in the 1930s, but is based on how Colonial Williamsburg looked while it served as the capital of Virginia from 1699 to 1780. We're going to start our tour at the most visited building in Colonial Williamsburg, the Grand Palace, viewed here from the Palace Green. The architectural style today is known as Colonial Revival. In addition to the Capitol, it is the largest building in Colonial Williamsburg. We're going to take a look at how the palace looked when Colonial Williamsburg first opened to the public in 1930s, as we see it here in this black and white photograph. We are now going to continue our tour and enter the gateway. Where you see those hedges in the rear of that photo, we enter into the palace, and we are going to see how it looked when Lord Dunmore, the last royal governor, lived there. Lord Dunmore fled the palace during the American Revolution. The palace was then occupied by the first two colonial governors of Virginia, Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson. In 1870, Thomas Jefferson moved the capital to Richmond, a good decision based on strategic purposes, but just a few months later, in 1781, the palace burnt to the ground. We are now starting our guided tour, entering into the palatial hallway. The muskets and swords that we see here today during the American Revolution were moved to the armory for safekeeping. Notice the swords, which were also called hangers, because they hung from the shoulders of the soldiers. We take a quick look at the crest above one of the wooden doors, and we peek into two adjacent rooms that serve the purpose of registering guests when they entered the palace. Notice the furnishings that have been recreated to look as they would have when Lord Dunmore lived here in the governor's palace. Notice also that this room, as well as all the rooms in the palace, have fireplaces. We are now about to peek into the second room off the hallway. And as we return to walk down the hallway, we will pass a room that was used for inventory purposes. We will pass it by quickly and walk up the grand mahogany stairway to the second floor, where our guide will greet us in what was known during the time period that the Dunmores lived here as the sitting room, used primarily by the children and Lady Dunmore. An elegant room with furnishings used for the children's play. And in the corner, we see a small canopied sleeping bed used by one of the Dunmore children. In an area facing the outside, looking outward, is Lady Dunmore's sitting area. We will leave the room and exit to the left and pass through a bedroom, again noting the fireplace. We will walk through this room and come to the children's bedroom that was shared among several of the children. It has been restored to look as it did when the Dunmores lived there. Of note is the fireplace with its delt tiles. Children's clothing, as it looked in that time period, can be seen in the room. The beautiful canopy beds are covered with bedspreads and drapery, looking as they would have based on historic documents when the Dunmores lived here. In the back corner of this room, we see a small child's bed. And as we glance back, we will also take note that alongside of one of the children's beds is a sitting table with a mirror. We will proceed through this room and exit as our guide takes us down the staircase back to the first floor, where we stop in at the dining room set up for a late afternoon meal. Notice that we see on one of the sidebars in this room a wig and a birdcage. We will leave the dining room and go into the grand ballroom, where we see many gigantic portraits of royalty. It was in this room that balls occurred, usually from invited guests of royalty who came to Colonial Williamsburg from Europe. The room was used for dancing, and we will see some of the musical instruments. That helped to give us a feel of what it looked like when the Dunmores lived there and entertained. On one side of the room, we see what is known as a warming stove. We pass through the grand ballroom and come to a room that was used for receptions following the ball. And we'll take a look at some of the furnishings here and imagine the appetizers and the dining. We are going to leave the palace and go to the kitchen, which is outside, and take a look at a demonstration. Have an opportunity to see some of the food prepared, laid out on a table. We now return outside to the palatial gardens and notice this walkway. At the very end, there is a staging area for theatrical performances. We walk through the gardens, and as we're about to leave the palace, we will stop at the stable to see some of the wagons that were used in that time period and what they looked like. As we leave the stable area, we return to the front of the palace and take one last look at the entranceway before we proceed down the palace green for our stop at one of our first historic homes. We stop now at the Peyton Randolph house, located at the corner of Nicholson and North England Streets. This house is considered one of the oldest and most historic homes in Colonial Williamsburg. It was originally purchased by Peyton's father, Sir John Randolph. Eventually, Peyton Randolph inherited his house. Many people have stayed here, including George Washington and Marquis de Lafayette. It was also one of the headquarters for the French during the siege of Yorktown in 1781. Of note, it is on the National Registry of Historic Homes. We proceed to the side of the building and enter the home where we meet our guide. We proceed through the entryway and come to a room where we have an opportunity to see a large portrait of Peyton Randolph. We are reminded he was a Revolutionary era leader, a cousin of Thomas Jefferson, an Attorney General of the Virginia colony, and chaired the First and Second Continental Congress. He was the first to be called Father of our country. Alongside of his portrait, we find a portrait of his wife. We next come to the dining room with this remarkable marble fireplace. We continue our tour of the first floor of the house, and then we proceed to see some of the sleeping quarters of this home. We have now moved up to the second floor to review some of the bedrooms. We will proceed through the bedrooms and back down the staircase to visit some of the outbuildings, stopping first at a two-story kitchen that has been completely restored, and then stopping at the smokehouse, and next at another one of the outhouses where we see that daily chores were accomplished. We now move back to the Palace Green and stop here at George Wythe's house, built in the 1750s. This home also served as headquarters for General Washington in September 1781, prior to the siege of Yorktown. We will walk to the back of this amazing brick building and enter the house, stopping first here at one of the studies, reminding us of what a scholar George Wythe was. We will review some of the rooms on the first floor, and across from the parlor, we enter one of the bedrooms on the first floor. We now proceed across the hallway to the dining room and then circle back around and go to the second floor. This room is highly significant. You will see a copy here of the Declaration of Independence with George Wythe's signature. So look carefully and I'll bring you up to a close-up so you might more easily see his signature below John Hancock's. We'll continue to proceed through the beautifully decorated bedrooms on the second floor. As we leave the interior of his house, we pause to review some historic facts about George Wythe. He was America's first professor of law, a classical scholar, a Virginia judge. He was also one of the first of 7 Virginians to sign the U.S. Declaration of Independence. He served as one of Virginia's representatives to the Continental Congress and the Philadelphia Convention. He taught and mentored Thomas Jefferson, John Marshall, Henry Clay, and many others. He was opposed to the Stamp Act of 1765 and other British taxes imposed upon the colonies. He served as a judge most of his life. Upon his death, he freed his slaves. Of note, it is rumored that he was poisoned by arsenic by a distant nephew who never served time because he was a mulatto, and in that time period, it was not possible for justice to be by way of a trial. We'll continue along just to peek into one of the outbuildings here before we leave George Witt's house and go across the Palace Green to visit our next historic home. The Thomas Everett House is located on the east side of the Palace Green. The home was built in 1718 and had several owners before Thomas Everett lived here. He purchased the home in 1750 and lived here with his wife and 2 daughters. He served many public offices. He was a clerk, a deputy, and at one time a mayor of Colonial Williamsburg. We now enter the home and admire the beautiful restorations. We are here now on the first floor. And are about to take a peek into the dining room. Where we also see that music was an important part of the family life. The home has been beautifully restored. We move now into the first floor bedroom, which is right behind the dining room. We have now moved upstairs to some of the bedrooms, and today the house is decorated to reflect the children at play, as we see here with some of the games that are sorted on the floor. The house is a beautiful example of the restoration work that we find in Colonial Williamsburg. And the home has been restored to look as it did when the Everetts lived here in the 1770s. We now leave the Everett home and proceed down the main avenue, what is known as the Duke of Gloucester Street, and we will be stopping here at the very famous Weatherburn Tavern and taking a grand tour of this historic site. Based on a large-scale research and inventories that were left, restoration projects here at Colonial Williamsburg enabled restoring the Weatherburn Tavern to how it looked during Colonial Williamsburg. And so as we proceed through the tavern, you'll have an opportunity to see how it functioned at that time as a meeting place, a place for people to come and rest and to dine. We are going to first enter a parlor area that was used by guests for entertaining purposes, for discussions in the evening, for playing cards. We are now going to proceed upstairs to look at the variety of sleeping quarters. The first room we enter is one that would have been inhabited by several guests, a shared room, and at times the beds were actually shared. This would have been one of the least expensive accommodations. We are going to now proceed down the hallway and look at more expensive accommodations. Again, shared room, but the guests had their own beds. We'll walk back downstairs to look at some of the dining facilities. Here we have a small dining area used by guests on a more modest budget. And behind this dining area, we see where the record keeping was done. We then move along to the grand ballroom that was used for many public meetings. And it is set today to look as though it is serving an elegant dinner to many guests. The serving platters, the silverware, the wall hangings have all been carefully researched to restore the tavern to how it looked during Colonial Williamsburg. We now proceed outside to the rear of the tavern and take a look at some of the very important outbuildings, including the kitchen area where servants did the cooking and preparation of the meals. Once the food was prepared, the servants brought it into the dining room for the guests. Across the street, on the Duke of Gloucester Street, we now come to another important tavern, the Raleigh Tavern, which was a gathering place for important dignitaries, including legislators of the royal governors of the House of Burgesses, and after the House of Burgesses was dissolved, of the elected legislative body. The tavern was named after Sir Walter Scott. It's believed the tavern was built around 1735 and changed ownership many times through the years. We are about to enter one of the rooms that served as an entryway when guests arrived, where they might stop and have a drink before they proceeded to one of the reception areas to attend either a meeting or a ball or another special event. Here we come to one of the grand meeting rooms. And now we move on to the very large room in the back where various activities occurred, some samples of which are shown here. We know a lot about the Raleigh Tavern because extensive inventory was kept, and here we see a sample menu reminding us of the price listing for beverages at that time period. We next stop in at the Charlton Coffeehouse, best known as the scene for the gathering to protest the Stamp Act. The rally occurred right here on the front porch. The coffeehouse has been recently restored based on historic records, inventory, and archaeological digs. The house was recently opened to the public, and today, upon entering the coffeehouse, you are greeted by friendly host and can be served coffee as well as hot chocolate, for which the coffee house was originally famous. Conveniently located across from the Capitol, it was an easy place to go to have follow-up meetings and discuss politics and policy of the day in any one of the secluded meeting rooms. We are now going to explore some of the shops and trades areas of Colonial Williamsburg, starting here at the weaving and spinning shop, where we'll have a chance to see 2 demonstrations.
Party a little bit right now. Explore wool to be spun.
Ooh-ah moment. Then I set it, and now it's part of the fabric. Now, if I pass it right back through the same shed, I'm going to be in trouble, right? Yeah, because I'm taking it right back out. So what I need is a new shed. I need to step down on the top 600 now and push it to the bottom. And when I do that, it's going to lift these bottom up to the top. There you go.
We next enter the barber and the perruque shop. Perruque is derived from the French, meaning wig making, which was a very fine art during this time period. Wigs were fashioned for the elite and the wealthy. Of interest, George Washington did not have a wig, but other colonial leaders of that time period did have wigs made. We are now going to see a demonstration.
That's from Turkey, horses from China, yaks from Tibet, and human Europe and Asia. And then once the hair is in my collection, after we have talked about the color, the style, the material, the quantity, and price, then I shave you bald. I throw your hair away, and then you wear someone else's. Shaving is not because of lice. It's to basically maintain the fit of the wig on your scalp. See, you start off with no hair. You have to end up with none. It will not stay on your scalp. So if you have a little bit of stubbles, it's a good thing because it acts like Velcro. So again, I shave you. The wood carver make the block, the shape of your head. A blockhead. From the block, I make the base to make the wig. So every strand of hair has to be woven onto the 3 strands of threads, no tying, and then we pull it down and slide it, and then it locks into place. And then you cut that row of hair off, and then sew it onto the base like you see here, 20, 40, 60, 80, and that puts you in the category of a big wig. The bigger your wig, the higher your status. And the wigs are going to come back in for cleaning. Good day to all of you, welcome. And this is what the soap is for.
Stop is at the tin shop. We will have a chance to watch the tin makers at work and see another demonstration.
That folds over twice, so that these 2 can clip together, and then I can pinch that together to hold it in place. Joel right now is doing a little bit of cleanup work for the tops of some cloches that he's making. So if you look over on his bench, there's a glass box that's going to go down to the gardens, and the gardeners are going to use it to help protect the little plants that are getting started or need to be protected from frost or cold. They've got 2 of them down there now, so keep an eye out for them. They're painted red. These will eventually get painted, and then they'll also get panes of glass attached inside, kind of like putting glass into a picture frame. But what he's doing right now is just cleaning up where he did his soldering. So when we solder, we use pine rosin for our flux, and when you scrape it away, it leaves kind of a sticky residue behind. So he's just dissolving that away with some alcohol to clean up those seams. Everything that we're making here in our shop is made out of tin-plated iron. So it's a really, really thin sheet of iron with a coating of tin on the outside. And when you pick this stuff up, you'll notice how light it is.
Okay, we'll continue along and make a stop at the apothecary. Take a quick peek inside. And from there, stop in to visit with the shoemaker and watch the shoemakers at work. And then we'll continue down the Duke of Gloucester Street and stop in to watch the blacksmith. Adjacent to the blacksmith shop is their kitchen, where we had an opportunity to watch the cooks at work and to hear them as they prepared a meal.
Working to supply Virginia troops during the American Revolution with the things that they're going to need in order to fight the field. Our job here in this kitchen is going to be to feed those workers that are on this property. A good 40 or so workers between 1778 and 1780. You're going to have enslaved individuals, journeymen that were working for Mr. Anderson before the war. You're going to have prisoners of war here, all of that. So this is a very active property. And as I said, our job is to go ahead and feed those. Since this is a semi-governmental site, we get a ration of food, just like we see on the table over here. Pound of meat, pound of flour over there cooked into ship's biscuit or hard cracker, and then dried peas or beans or rice, whatever the commissary can get their hands on.
Is this biscuits?
Ship's biscuit or hard cracker was what was called in the 18th century.
Do I have a pen I can cut these chunks?
Our advantage over the soldier out in the field, since we're in a fixed location, we can get fresh vegetables here often. A little harder in the time. We get fresh vegetables here, we get fresh meat here, and that flour there we can take out to the bread oven, which is just under the lean-to out there, and go ahead and turn that into a 1-pound loaf of bread instead of those hard biscuits. So that's what we do here in this kitchen, is to cook for those workers that are on this property. Black-eyed.
As we leave the blacksmith's kitchen, we head over to the cabinet making shop to watch the cabinet makers at work. Nearby to the cabinet making shop, we come to the brickyard, where we see the kilns, and we also note that some of the bricks that are made here were used in the restoration of the Peyton Randolph house for the outbuildings, including the smokehouse. And as we approach the end of our tour of Colonial Williamsburg, we are going to stop at the Capitol building, which, along with the Governor's Palace, is the largest building in Colonial Williamsburg. We are now viewing it from the Duke of Gloucester Street. We are going to walk through the gate and now view it from the way you would enter for a tour. And we are now proceeding to see the Capitol building from the other side. A tour to Colonial Williamsburg also includes hearing costume interpreters such as Thomas Jefferson here and George and Martha Washington. We are making one final stop at the magazine where we are going to hear one of the daily cannon fire.
Give! Fire! Gunners, load by the parade trail at the normal speed. Now the gun is fired by a linstock. A linstock is a pole that holds the slow match. Slow match is rope that's soaked in saltpeter or sulfur.
The most famous features of visiting Colonial Williamsburg is hearing the Fife and Drum Corps.